This is Sports Bash Saturday with Josh Hennig, live from the Matt Blatt Kia Studios. Now, Sports Bash Saturday. Here's Josh Hennig.
I am Josh Hennig, and we are live here in the Matt Blatt Kia Studios. How's everybody doing today? It was a little cloudy outside when I woke up this morning, but, still the weekend, still a nice opportunity for you to go out and get some fresh air. Text board is open for you. Join the conversation, 609-403-0973. We got Phillies to talk about. We got NFL to talk about. We got NBA bubble. We got Sixers to recap. Joining us at 1 o'clock to talk more about the Sixers is Kevin McCormick, our 97.3 ESPN.com Phillies writer, to talk about his thoughts on the Sixers scrimmage from yesterday, what we can expect for the game tomorrow. Of course, you can hear all the action right here on 97.3 ESPN. Coverage tomorrow begins at 12 noon. And then the Sixers have one more scrimmage on Tuesday night before they resume their 8-game run before the playoffs. Of course, you can hear all the Sixers action right here on 97.3 ESPN. As usual, I'll give you my UFC bets for the night. Tonight is a pretty stacked card, actually. It's one of the better cards that's not a pay-per-view we've had in the last couple months, so there's some opportunities to make a little money there. Of course, we went 1-1 last week on our bet, so we'll see if we can do a little bit better this week for you. That's a little bit later in the show. But I got to start off with the Phillies because, what I saw from the Phillies yesterday really reminded me a lot of what I love and what frustrates me about sports. And on one hand, listen, if you're a sports fan and you're not happy to see baseball back on TV, then I can't do too much for you. But what I do know for a fact is that, when the Phillies came on yesterday, it was like I got so excited. Like I didn't really jump up and down or anything, but I was just so looking forward to it. And listen, Aaron Nola, the Phillies, gave you a good game for about 5 innings, and then it all fell apart. And that's what frustrates you, because then what do you see? You make the mistake of going online and you check out what everybody else is saying. This Phillies team stinks. Aaron Nola shouldn't be the Phillies opening day starter. Joe Girardi is an idiot. This bullpen can't pitch. These Phillies hitters suck. You hear all these different things, and you're like, okay, well, at least we know fans haven't changed much due to the pandemic, right? With sports being away, some of the impressions haven't changed much. But I think we got to remember that, look, when it comes to sports, we got to remember that when you think about the Philadelphia Phillies, we got to remember that ultimately these guys literally just started playing baseball again. And there's going to be some teams that start out well and some that don't start out so well. And yeah, if you want to say that maybe Girardi could have pulled Nola a little bit earlier, maybe he shouldn't have gone to who he went to in the bullpen. I mean, it felt like the whole bullpen experiment just floundered and failed all over the place. I mean, at what point do you go through your bullpen and you realize that you don't have the arms? That's why I'm still surprised they didn't keep Liriano on the staff. I feel like that was a real situation where you could have used him last night to come out of the bullpen. And instead, you go to the bullpen, and I still can't believe this. You brought in Rosso. I mean, Rosso just looked poor. I mean, he just imploded on the mound. And let's be realistic. They accounted 4 runs to Nola. Nola doesn't deserve all 5 of those runs. Rosso deserves one of those runs because let's be realistic. That 1 run scored because he was that bad. And then this guy McLean comes in. He actually pitches well. And then Austin Davis comes in. He pitches all right. So why didn't you go with McLean and Davis instead of Rosso? And that's where the second guessing comes in. I'm not going to sit here and act like that Joe Girardi's a bad manager. He doesn't know what he's doing. But listen, game one, I'm not going to act like that's the end of the world. And I still believe this Phillies team has a chance to make the postseason. This Phillies team still has a chance to make a run despite the day one loss. You can't hold one game against a team, even in a 60-game stretch, because you can go 32-28 and have a chance to make the playoffs. That means you are only winning a little bit more than half of your games to reach the postseason. And that is completely and 100% possible with these 16-game expanded playoffs, 8 from each league making it in, the top 2 teams from each division, and then 3 teams, the 2 teams with the best record after that. You absolutely can still make the postseason. So I'm not going to sweat that the Phillies didn't get a win yesterday. What I will sweat is the fact that I don't like the fact that they started out so slow. That, to me, is what's concerning. Text board is open, 609-403-0973. And with tonight's game, with Zach Wheeler on the mound, you would assume that the Phillies, maybe learn from yesterday, try to be a little bit better, try to be a little bit more consistent. It felt like the at-bats at times were a little forced. I felt that Hoskins and Kingery and Bruce at times, and even Realmuto a little bit, they just didn't really seem, really 100% ready for opening day. And part of that may have been because of the whole pandemic situation. What gets overlooked about the Phillies and what frustrates me also is that Aaron Nola and Max Scherzer both had rough opening days for their teams. And the big difference between Nola and Scherzer isn't the team they played. Because I know that's what everyone's going to say. Well, Scherzer got knocked around by the Yankees and we got knocked around by the Marlins. And I've already heard that excuse a couple times. That's not the real difference. The real difference from what we saw with Max Scherzer opening night and Aaron Nola last night actually comes down to their own teams. You see, when Scherzer gave up 4 runs, just like Aaron Nola on his stat sheet, he was doing so with a batting order that is missing multiple players from last year's team. They're missing one of their catchers, Castillo. They're missing Ryan Zimmerman. They're missing Anthony Rendon. And they were missing Juan Soto because of a controversial positive, not positive COVID test. So you're missing 4 guys from what you had last year. The Phillies were missing nobody. And if you want to blame anybody, I'm not blaming Girardi. I'm not blaming Nola. I'm blaming the doggone hitters. Where was Harper when you needed him? Where was Realmuto when you needed him? Where was Bruce? Where was Hoskins? Didi Gregorius scored both your runs last night, and one of them was a home run. And I'm supposed to get on Twitter and, why did Joe Girardi? No. Why didn't the Phillies hitters step up? And that's where the key is. If this Phillies team is going to have success this year, last night only proved that the pitching staff can only do so much. The pitching staff can only do so much to save you and salvage you. Because when push comes to shove, this Phillies team does not have lockdown pitching on a night-to-night basis. And while most of baseball doesn't have lockdown pitching, if you watched half the games already from yesterday, you realize that there's only a handful of teams that actually have top-tier pitching. Phillies hitters got to step up. McCutchen went 0 for 4. Harper went 0 for 3. Realmuto went 0 for 4. Segura went 0 for 4. Bruce went 0 for 4. So you could blame Girardi, and you can complain about Nola, and you can do all that all you want. But your big bats failed miserably yesterday. And I don't want to hear about how, Alcantara had a great game. He still threw 2 walks in 6 2/3 innings. He didn't throw 14 strikeouts. He threw 7 strikeouts. Did I mention he had 2 walks? He wasn't unhittable. But people want to act like he was because, they got to find an excuse. Now, the only excuse yesterday was I was completely and utterly disappointed in the Phillies lineup. When Max Scherzer lost his game and he allowed 4 runs to the Yankees in opening night Thursday night, he did so with a batting lineup that was missing 4 players from last year's team. The Phillies added Gregorius. The Phillies brought back Jay Bruce. The Phillies pretty much have a healthy Andrew McCutchen. They have all intents and purposes, a well-built baseball team, I should say. So they have no excuses. And, maybe I was a little spoiled from the Sixers scrimmage as well because the Sixers looked good in that scrimmage. We'll talk more about that with Kevin McCormick coming up at 1 o'clock about Ben Simmons hitting a 3 and the play of the Sixers defense and all that. But while they looked good, the Phillies hitters looked pretty poor. And that was frustrating last night. Very, very frustrating. Text board is open, 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation, 609-403-0973 right here on 97.3 ESPN. Also, after we went off the air yesterday, myself and Hunter Brody, the NFL came to their agreement on the protocols for their return to play. Players Union, League, they all have come to an agreement. And looks like the agreement is pretty straightforward. It pretty much comes down to there's going to be no preseason as we all expected. It looks like the NFL is going to stay on schedule as far as everything is set up. Teams can reduce their rosters, but they don't have to immediately to get to the 80-player situation. We know the players in the union have agreed on a salary cap situation where the salary cap next year will not be any less than $175, but it could be more depending on how revenue goes this year. So, as expected, the NFL and the NFL Players Association came to an agreement. Just like I thought all along. And I'm not saying that to be facetious. I'm being that completely honestly with you. If you thought that the NFL was going to lock out their players or the players were going to strike when they were this close to getting on the field, you are grossly mistaken. The NFL completely understands what is at stake for everyone right now. And for everyone right now, we need to realize that sports is one of the few things that we have actually for normalcy and for something to distract us from the real world. With everything going on in the world when it comes to COVID-19 and social injustice and everything that politically is polarizing us in an election year for president, sports could be the one thing that kind of gives us that relief, and we're finally getting it. With baseball back this weekend, the NBA having scrimmages this weekend leading into the games officially starting next weekend. Of course, you can hear opening night for the NBA's bubble games right here on 97.3 ESPN. We'll have the Lakers and Clippers on Thursday night with their matchup. When you think about the sports coming back, this is really what we need right now. And I don't think it can be understated the fact that the world needs a distraction. And look, you might not have been a UFC fan, but some of you watched it. And you might not have been a NASCAR fan, but some of you watched it. And you might not have been an MLS fan, but some of you watched it because it kept you at least having something to see and to observe and to consume until the bigger sports came back to play. And with no NFL preseason, you're not even going to miss it because you're going to have Every night is going to be baseball, basketball, and hockey next month. You're not going to miss the preseason. Trust me. Look, the preseason was always a thing to have as an excuse not to have to watch a baseball game at times. Let's be realistic. How many of you watched an NFL preseason game because you love preseason? No, you watched the preseason because you love football and you wanted to consume some football because at some point when the Phillies weren't playing or your favorite team wasn't playing, you didn't really want to watch Padres versus Giants at 10 o'clock at night, and you didn't want to watch Rangers versus Royals last year. Like it just wasn't doing anything for you unless you had money on the game or you were a fantasy baseball player or a DFS guy or you were someone who was, again, invested for some other reason. If there's no intense investment in those games, you don't have a ton of interest in it. Now, at times, you don't have to have that problem because baseball hasn't been going on for the last few months. We got tired of baseball in July and August because the season drug out for so long. Now with 60 games, less of an opportunity to really get exasperated too quickly. And that's a good thing, and I think it's an opportunity for all of us to try to get back to some sort of normalcy. And I love that. And the NFL, I always knew was going to figure this out. Because, one, there was too much money involved not to figure it out. But also, number two, the NFL and the NFLPA have been negotiating a lot of this stuff that we've been seeing for several months. Ever since the new CBA was agreed upon, the new CBA was agreed upon with an understanding that if there was a shutdown due to COVID, that the players' union and the league were going to discuss their way through it all. We've seen multiple reports about that. So we know, we've been explained to, that when it comes to sports, these professional sports were always going to come back because there was too much money to be lost versus money to be made. And you don't want to lose money in an environment where there is tens of millions of people still out of work. There are all these people out of work. You don't want to be the reason why, one, you're out of work, and number two, more people are out of work. So there's a lot riding on sports' shoulders. And I think that for the UFC, for NASCAR, for the PGA Tour, they understood that their financial viability long-term required them to get back as soon as possible. Whereas the team sports had to be a little bit more delicate and a bit more deliberate in their planning. By the way, NBA, 0 COVID cases during the most recent testing as players once they got into the bubble. The bubble's working. The NHL will be leaving for their hub cities in just a few days. And we'll see how that goes with them in their hub cities. Baseball has actually had fewer and fewer tests each round of testing since they've reported for summer camp to now. So we know that that's working. So sports have an understanding how to do this. And while we may have a positive tests here and there along the way, especially for baseball and the NFL, where they're not completely isolated like the NBA and the NHL are, there is something to be said for the fact that sports have a handle on this. They have independent labs that they are paying to take care of all this, and they're going to get it done. Because at the end of the day, like I said, there's too much money on the line. There's billions of dollars on the line. So the fact that there were some people out there who were saying there won't be sports, they won't play, this is ridiculous, blah, 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 you didn't get it. It was never about COVID as much as it was about money. And by the way, that's also the reason why there probably won't be college sports until the spring or late winter of 2021. Because college sports don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the resources. They don't have everything available to them to do what the professional sports are doing. You can't make people do something because they're not your employees. The campuses are not all open for you to even be on campus. There's too many what-ifs with the college sports. So we always knew that the professional sports could get done because there was too much money involved. There was too much money to be lost for everybody involved. Josh Hennig here on the 973 ESPN. Text board is open 609-403-0973. Again, coming up at 1 p.m., we'll talk more Sixers and NBA with Kevin McCormick, 973.com, 973ESPN.com, Sixers writer, I should say. Also, you can check it out on the 973 ESPN mobile app, powered by First Bank of Sea City. Another thing I want to touch on before I get to a text real quick. So I purposely left the TV in the studio on the WNBA game one right now. Now, I said purposely because I could have put on something else on the TV. I'm the only person in the studio. Frankly, I've been the only person in the studio every Saturday for a couple months now because, well, COVID-19, welcome to 2020, right? So, and I wanted to just say this about the presentation of the WNBA setup. It's very similar to the NBA's, although I like the court layout better than the NBA's. The reason I say that is because they have the sidelines a different color. So if you go out of bounds, it's not the same exact court color as the inbounds, whereas the NBA bubble, after the out of bounds black line, it's the same color. They have the baselines and the sidelines a completely different color. I think that's very smart of them. I like that look, but it's still a similar setup to the NBA. And I think that this is where the NBA and the WNBA get it. This is a television product. This is not an in-arena product. This court, this arena, this setup with these sports with no fans is all about two things: the athletes and the television viewer. It's about nothing else. You're not selling these ads on the sideline that they have for the athletes in the building. They don't care. They're out there playing. It's for you and me watching at home. So when you see these ads, I'm not going to get bent out of shape over it, but I understand this is a television product. And I think that this is where the NBA and WNBA gets it. I love the fact that they understand this is a television product. I think this is where baseball, I think, has got to figure out a better way to do the crowd noise situation. Having it just only play in the stadium, it feels a little muffled. It feels a little distant. When Didi Gregorius hit the home run for the Phillies last night, and they have the virtual fake fans cheering in the stadium, if you're watching on television or you're observing it, you're like, I could barely hear that. Like, unless you knew it was coming, you might not have heard it at all. You hear the announcer announcing who's coming up to bat better than you hear the virtual crowd noise and the other things. And I think that's where it's going to be interesting to see how each of these sports do the presentation, because I think each of these sports is going to have something that they could do better. I'm very curious to see how hockey does. There's a lot of reports are going to have, video game style virtual fans in the arena. There's a lot of talk that Fox has told other networks they're willing to share the technology that they use for the crowd noise on the television broadcast and for the virtual fans they have on different broadcasts. We'll wait and see how that agreement goes, because anytime someone says, I am willing to share something with my rival, there's probably some sort of caveat involved, right? There's got to be some sort of backdoor dealing going on. 609-403-0973. Again, on the conversation. 609-403-0973. Nick from Brigantine chimes in. Good to hear from Nick from Brigantine, by the way. Hope you're doing well, Nick. I know it's a crazy world out there. Hope you take care of yourself. Nick says, do you think that no fans at games, the final outcome will be met with or even plays, due to heavy betting? Nick also asked, do you think that if weather will be dealt with differently because of the fact that there won't be fans? So, a couple things there. And I'll address that real quick before we get the break. So, I think the weather situation when it comes to baseball was pretty much played out as we thought it would, which was on opening night with the Yankees-Nationals game, The rain just was so ridiculous, they just called the game because they played the prerequisite number of innings. I think that is where the no fans will have an impact, and it will be different with weather. Because I think they'll be less likely to postpone games and try to make them up than they would otherwise. Because basically you're playing 60 games in 67 days. So you don't have a lot of wiggle room for make goods or anything else. It's either doubleheader the next day or nothing. I think that's where you're going to see, maybe the weather having an impact differently with the fans. Because if you had a full 162-game season, you got some wiggle room on the schedule. You got some opportunities to make good games later. You got to reimburse people. There's all these logistics that go into postponing, delaying. Whereas when there's no fans in the stands, it's just like, all right, we played 6 innings. It's downpouring, still thunder. Let's just call the game 4-1, game over. I think that's where the weather will be impacting without no fans. Now, you mentioned about the outcome being messed with or anything like that due to heavy betting. I think that will not be an issue because there's too much pride and too much ego with the people playing these games to try to be messing with outcomes or situations because there's too small of a confined space for a margin of error right now. There's only 60 baseball games. So you can't just throw away one game or one result because someone's going to notice. Someone's going to pick up on it. There's too much invested for the players. I mean, the players get bonuses. They make the postseason. So, are you going to really put yourself in jeopardy of making your postseason money just because of one game or one outcome? I don't see that. And the same thing with basketball. Basketball, you have 8 games for seeding, and then you got to make the postseason. That's another situation where there's too small of a confinement to be messing with results because of betting or anything like that.
This is Sports Bash Saturday with Josh Hennig, live from the Matt Blatt Kia Studios. Here's Josh Hennig.
I am Josh Hennig, Sports Bash Saturday, 97.3 ESPN. We'll dive deeper into the Sixers and the NBA coming up. Next segment, Kevin McCormick, 97.3 ESPN Sixers writer, 973ESPN.com, 973 ESPN mobile app. Speaking of 97.3 ESPN, just a small programming note. I want to remind everybody that this past week was the final week, at least for now, of the warm-up with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN. Next week, I will be filling in for Mike Gill on the Sports Bash. So myself and Hunter Brody, you guys for a full week next week of sports talk as we get you ready for the Sixers and Flyers officially setting off for launch. Hear all the action right here on 97.3 ESPN. And then coming August 10th, I will be on hosting the new Game Night show here on 97.3 ESPN, your official pregame show for all Sixers, Flyers games. They're the night games as well as during the NFL season, Monday and Thursday night football. So I'm going to have you covered all football and NBA, NHL seasons. Little pregame leading you, getting you prepared in for those game actions and talking about all the sports stories from throughout the day. So I've really enjoyed all the text board interaction that we've had from 1 to 2 over the last few months. I want to thank everyone again for texting in, being a part of the show all these weeks. We've had some great conversations, great guests we've gotten through the 4 months since sports shut down. Also, thank Mike Gill for giving me the opportunity to be on the air and have the opportunity to move 6 to 7. It's another opportunity to talk more sports in a setting and an environment that's going to be wild and exciting. I'm really looking forward to sports being back on pretty much every single night. We'll be talking about it. But next week I'll be on from 2 to 6 with Hunter Brody on the Sports Bash, and then Mike Gill will be back the following Monday, and then I'll be starting the new show on August 10th, Game Night, with yours truly right here on 97.3 ESPN. Just wanted to review the little programming note. I'll still be doing Sports Bash Saturday, every Saturday, 12 to 2. Of course, now with sports coming back, we may get, preempted for only 12 to 1 in certain ways because it might be a Sixers or a Flyers game at 1 o'clock or a baseball game we want to bring you here on 97.3 ESPN. So we're slowly getting back to normal, and we're all adapting to the changing sports world around us. And I'm very happy and excited to be given the opportunity to still be a part of that with all of you guys. And again, I especially thank all of you who have been, tweeting at me, texting me throughout the shows, being a part of the conversations, because at the end of the day, we're doing this all for you guys out there. So thank you for your involvement, and I appreciate you guys continue listening to 97.3 ESPN and popping on the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. All right, that all being said, coming up next, Ben Simmons, a stretch 4, Kevin McCormick next.
This is Sports Bash Saturday with Josh Hennig, live from the Matt Blatt Kia Studios. Now, Sports Bash Saturday. Here's Josh Hennig.
Another Saturday. We're talking sports, but we're actually talking about sports that is happening in the real world, not in our projected hopeful minds, or no 2K talk either. I'm actually not going to start the video game talk, because I will literally lose all of you in that conversation, because I have a beef with video games right now. That's that conversation for another day. But we got to talk some Sixers. Ben Simmons, a stretch 4. What? We'll get into all that and more from the Sixers scrimmage yesterday. Look ahead to tomorrow's scrimmage, which you can hear right here on 97.3 ESPN as the Sixers ramp up for their playoff run. Kevin McCormick joins us now on the Boardwalk on the hotline. You can check out all of his work over at 973ESPN.com, as well as the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. And make sure to follow him on Twitter at KevinMCC973. Kev, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, Josh. I'm excited like you. It's good to have an actual new game to talk about for the first time in months.
Well, one of the things we do got to talk about is, and you put the tweet out there, and I saw a couple other people bring this up as well. So basically, it looks like that Ben Simmons can actually be a floor spacer and be a stretch 4 in that game yesterday. I know it's only a scrimmage, but we got to think that there's elements to what we saw in that game yesterday that can be rolled back into real basketball play.
Oh, absolutely. I think, the movement of him off ball will help with that a lot, just because the play where he made his 3 yesterday was very similar to 2 threes we saw him make in the regular season. So now seeing him off the ball in positions where he can get into spots where he feels comfortable and the ball is coming to him as opposed to him having to create that 3-point shot on his own is going to be crucial to him, hopefully shooting more as the season continues.
I feel like also he may actually be a better assist man playing off the ball at times, because it allows him to not have to be the primary guy bringing the ball up the court. It allows him to maybe survey the scene from a different perspective. And I think that's maybe opening up more opportunities for him to get assists.
Absolutely. I think one thing that's really going to help is with him moving to that front court, we now get to see him in position. We actually saw this a lot yesterday, where he would catch a rebound or a steal right at the rim and instantly push the break. And now with him moving to the front court and adding another smaller wing player out there, you have an extra weapon out there to go spot up on the 3, to where either it's a Furkan Korkmaz or a Matisse Thybulle, to where now Ben's able to just run coast to coast and have multiple options to either dish out for a 3 or even have those guys create the space to him just get right to the rim.
Also, how important is it the fact that, I think we overlooked the reality that, when the Sixers hit the break because of the pandemic, everything getting shut down, these guys were suffering from a lot of issues. Ben had the back. Joel had some nagging health issues. We know that Tobias wasn't 100% healthy either. So, how much of this layoff may have also benefited the Sixers? Because when I saw Ben Simmons yesterday, he looked like a new man almost physically.
Absolutely. There was a good amount of that game where Ben Simmons looked hands down like he was the best player on the court, and he showed it too. He looked extremely confident just in the way he was playing and in his game. I mean, we saw him throw a no-look alley-oop from the 3-point line to Tobias Harris. I mean, the comfort level of this team and the confidence that he showed yesterday was very big for me.
Kevin McCormick joining us here on the Boardwalk kind of hotline on 97.3 ESPN, 76ers and NBA writer for 97.3 ESPN.com. Kevin, another thing with Ben Simmons is I know everyone wants to talk about the 3-point shot, but the bigger thing to me was his willingness to play off the ball. And this is something that we talked about a little bit last week, because when I had Brandon Robinson, Scoop B, on to talk about it, he brought this up, and I did a little bit digger deeping. There's a long history in the NBA of guys who were primary ball handlers who then played off the ball, and them and their teams had a lot of success. So is there a possibility that playing off the ball actually puts Ben Simmons in an opportunity to impact the team even more than previously?
Absolutely, because I think you're putting him in more positions to show just how good of a scorer he can be as well. And I think he actually showed a great balance yesterday of being aggressive as a scorer, but also being able to impact the game with his playmaking as well. But I think definitely in this new role, in the sense of you'll be able to throw him in different kind of spots and really allow him to elevate his game and show just how much he can do on the offensive side of the ball.
Now, you mentioned offense. What about the defense? I know that some people were saying, well, it's just a scrimmage, but I felt like the Sixers really took an opportunity in front of them to show what they can do defensively, getting active hands. I mean, Matisse and Ben, the combination of those two guys, and even Shake Milton, those guys had a tremendous game on the perimeter against a team that, let's be realistic, if the Grizzlies can't impact you with their perimeter players, they have a lot of trouble beating teams.
Yeah, I mean, we saw from the offseason that, the mantra of this team became size and length. And, Brett has said a million times throughout the year that this team was built for the playoffs and that the Sixers were going to become a defensive powerhouse this year. And I think they showed it in all areas yesterday. I mean, one thing that really stuck out to me was how active everyone's hands were in the passing lanes. And that's going to be big because perimeter play is, how teams run their offense these days. It's not inside out, it's outside in. So, I mean, having all those guys out there being able to pick the passing lanes, whether it's Tobias Harris or Matisse Thybulle or Ben Simmons. I mean, even the backcourt players. I mean, Shake Milton is only 6'5", has a 7-foot wingspan, along with Josh Richardson, who's equally as tall, and a 6'10" wingspan. I mean, the Sixers have the length, and the effort they showed on defense yesterday was very great.
What did you think of how Brett Brown went to the bench? The when and where he brought in Korkmaz, Thybulle, Horford. What did you think of that strategy? Because I felt like, Brett was kind of telling us a little bit about how he views his bench with the order he brought those guys in.
I thought the rotations were good last night. I thought we got to see a good mix of different lineups together and, different pairings on the court. We actually got to see a little bit of Al Horford and Joel Embiid, which was quite a surprise after Brett said they didn't spend any time together in practice. But all in all, I thought the rotations were very spread out. I thought it was good that we got to see everybody get out there and kind of shake the rust off. But I think the rotations will change a little bit as play develops. But all in all, I liked all the pairings and the rotations that Brett threw out yesterday.
What did you think of the play of Thybulle? I thought Thybulle made a very good case to have a larger role in those 8 games between how he played defensively, but also his willingness to be a part of the offense as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I thought he had a very good game. Although he only made 1 3, he shot 4, which is good because, I mean, obviously that first game back, everything is not going to fall. But the fact that he's showing that willingness to really lock in and be that catch-and-shoot guy on offense is going to be big. And we saw that huge poster dunk on Jaren Jackson Jr., which was awesome just from a confidence standpoint. It's just good to see him being aggressive and still, trying to grow his game on that end because he understands that that's going to make him an even more valuable piece moving forward.
What do you think about how Brett is going to use Korkmaz and Thybulle in terms of, is there a possibility because of certain teams they may play those guys together and not one or the other?
I think we'll see them together in stints. I mean, one lineup that Brett has talked about during his media availability, and then we actually got to see it yesterday, was Ben Simmons at point guard, Thybulle and Korkmaz together along with Tobias Harris and Al Horford together in the front court. And I thought that lineup actually played rather well in their time together on the court. But if Matisse Thybulle is knocking down his shot, I think they could be a great pairing together. I mean, you'll have another great perimeter defender to go with Ben Simmons and Matisse Thybulle, and you'll have all the weapons and shooting and spacing with the two of them out there together with Ben Simmons to kind of orchestrate the offense.
Now, you mentioned Al Horford. What did you think about how he looked yesterday? Because he he made some jumpers. He had some impact on the offensive side of the ball.
I thought he looked good. He said before that he was kind of really getting into his groove right before the season was suspended. So, I mean, he looked like his legs were under him. He looked like he was moving well, and hopefully he continues to build on it.
Kevin McCormick here with me on the Boardwalk on the Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure you're following him on Twitter. Kevin MCC973 covers the Sixers for 97.3 ESPN.com. Kevin, who else from the bench stood out to you yesterday? Because I felt like Brett at one point just decided to empty the entire bench. And I know, Norvel Pelle made some highlights because of his three, but legitimately of the guys who are going to make an impact when the Sixers get back to official play, who off the bench stood out to you?
One guy for me that stood out was Glenn Robinson III. I feel like he got a good amount of minutes yesterday, which we could see a lot moving forward. But just the energy he brought. I mean, he's even said a lot that he's really just focusing on playing his role and doing what he can do to the best of his ability. And I thought he did that well yesterday. He came in, brought great energy, was playing both sides of the floor, running hard, was moving around off the ball well, spotting up, was able to knock down the three, had a nice dunk on the break. But this play was great just because he's another one who's in that batch of wing players off the bench to where if they get hot, they're a real weapon for the Sixers.
Now, flip it forward to tomorrow's scrimmage. Of course, people can hear it right here on 97.3 ESPN, 12 o'clock. Tom McGinnis calling all the action. What are some of the things that you are looking forward into this scrimmage from the second time round for this Sixers unit?
Hopefully in Game 2, one thing I'm looking for, I want to see a little bit more of Joel Embiid. He only played 12 minutes yesterday, which I fully understand. It's the first scrimmage game. He hasn't been back in months. You really want to ease your way in with a guy like him. But I thought he looked phenomenal. For having 4 months off, his jumper was looking great. In 12 minutes, he got 10 points, handful of boards, knocked down a pair of threes. I mean, hopefully in this next game we get to see a little more of Joel Embiid, maybe a little more in the post, just to see what he's been working on and to see, just how much better he has gotten in the time away.
Now, speaking of Embiid, we didn't see a ton of him yesterday, but what is a reasonable expectation for him when these 8 games hit? Because I know Brett previously talked about him playing 38 minutes, and Embiid's only done that, I think, 4 times in his entire postseason career, playing at least 38 minutes. So I don't know if I'm sitting here and being like, yeah, give me Embiid for 38 minutes. So what's a reasonable expectation for Joel when the Sixers get back to full-blown action next weekend?
In those seeding games, I feel like right around that 30-minute mark would be a good, kind of setting point for him in these 8 seeding games, just because you don't want to go fully rampant with him day one. Obviously, you still want to continue to ease him in, and you want him to be fresh for the playoffs. But yeah, you still want to get him enough time out there to break that sweat, back in the groove of inaction. So hopefully they don't continue to keep a light load on him, but obviously you don't want to go all out with him because you don't want to burn out and come playoff time.
Now, you mentioned him getting burned out. Now, I'm just going to play devil's advocate here. Isn't he supposed to be in this great shape and great condition? He's been working out 6 days a week, and he's in the best shape of his life, blah, 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 blah. So how much of it is him getting burned out, and how much of it is his conditioning up to the level that the Sixers want him to be to play the maximum number of minutes?
I feel like his conditioning's there. Even though we saw him a little bit yesterday, I thought he moved well on the court yesterday, and there's been previous videos that they released of scrimmages recently in Orlando, obviously them just playing themselves. But, he looks like he's moving well. He looks like he's thinned out a little bit, which is a good sign. But it's more of just you want to ease him back into it, especially, a guy at his size and with his injury history. Yeah, even though they've come out and said he's in the best shape of his life and he's been working so hard, you don't want to try too hard to, kind of prove it to everybody. You'd rather just wait, make sure he's ready so that come playoffs, he can then step up and show that, just to back up all the talk.
Now, you mentioned and talk about back up the talk. I think if the Sixers are healthy, they have a chance to make a deep playoff run when these games return after the 8 games. Because, number one, you're going to be playing a Pacers and a Wizards team that, let's be realistic, they don't really have a full-powered team in those 8 games. So you have an opportunity to move up in the standings if you want to. You have an opportunity to get yourself 100% ready for a postseason run where I think the Sixers can match up with the best teams in the Eastern Conference. What do you think, Kev?
Absolutely. In my eyes, I think it's honestly a 3-team race in the East right now between Philadelphia and Milwaukee and Toronto. In my eyes, those are the 3 teams that have a serious chance to represent the Eastern Conference in these finals. But in terms of depth and talent, you can't say that the Sixers roster isn't the best or up there with the best in the conference or the league right now. I mean, you have guys like Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, and they also have one of the deepest benches that we've seen in years. So in terms of talent and what they have at the ready right now, the Sixers look poised to make a deep run.
If you could zero in on a team that you think would give the Sixers trouble in a postseason series in the Eastern Conference, that's not the Milwaukee Bucks. Give me another team that you are looking at. You're just saying, listen, if this team brings this thing to the table, that could be a problem for the Sixers in the playoffs.
I would have to say it's Toronto. Obviously, they lost Kawhi Leonard, who was the anchor of that series last year, but they're still an extremely deep roster. They're still an extremely talented roster. They have arguably the best coach in the NBA right now, Nick Nurse. So in terms of a team, I would try to avoid it with the team that could really give the Sixers fits. It would be Toronto, just because even in the regular season, they just play them really well. Nick Nurse has shown that he knows how to play on the Sixers' weaknesses. You know, the Sixers were able to upset them once this year. In terms of how they would match up in a playoff series, I think it could arguably go either way.
What concerns you more about the Raptors? Is it the guard play, or is it the fact that Marc Gasol has already shown the ability to give Embiid trouble? I
think it's a combination of a lot of that. They have a guy like Marc Gasol who can defend Joel Embiid. Pascal Siakam is a larger front court player that is able to slow down Ben Simmons. And, I mean, just their depth, but arguably their secret weapon is their coach. I mean, having a great guy like Nick Nurse orchestrating that entire team is arguably what scares me the most about Toronto.
Yeah, I think Nick Nurse should be the coach of the year, but that's just my opinion. I don't get a vote in that thing. He's Kevin McCormick here joining us on the Boardwalk on the hotline. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at KevinMCC973. Of course, make sure you check out all of his work at 973ESPN.com as him and Jason Blevins are covering wall-to-wall Sixers coverage as the Sixers have 2 more scrimmages, and then it's officially back to games that count. And you hear all the action right here on 97.3 ESPN. Kevin, appreciate you jumping on the show today, and I'm sure we'll be touching base soon.
Thanks, Josh. No problem.
Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN again. Sixers versus the OKC Thunder tomorrow at noon right here on 97.3 ESPN. Text board is open, 609-403-0973. By the way, Woj's suspension is over, and he's already dropping Woj bombs. The Knicks and Tom Thibodeau are finalizing a 5-year deal to make him the franchise's next head coach. Now, the following tweet is interesting. Knicks president Leon Rose and agent Spencer Breaker of CAA Sports are working to complete the contractual terms and a signed agreement expected in the near future. Now, the significance of that is, remember, Leon Rose spent a long time working with CAA before he became the Knicks president. So you have to think that there may have been an opportunity to get a deal done here for Tibbs that maybe wasn't there for Jason Kidd previously. Remember, yesterday the New York the New York Daily News was reporting that the lead candidate yesterday was Jason Kidd. And part of the reason why Kidd was the lead candidate was because of the fact that James Dolan and Tom Thibodeau were bucking heads over the contract. So you have to wonder now that you have the current CAA agent for Tibbs working with a former CAA guy, Leon Rose, to get this deal done. Maybe in situations they say, let's get James Dolan and Tibbs away from each other because we can get this deal done. It shouldn't be that hard because apparently, according to reports, Tibbs is really looking for something specifically when it came to his contractual demands. So, again, Woj is reporting it looks like Tibbs is going to the Knicks. And I'm incredibly curious how that is going to look because Tibbs directly and indirectly has said that he's not really interested in developing young players. Well, let me tell you something. You look at the Knicks, they're mostly just young players. R.J. Barrett, Kevin Knox, Frank Ntilikina. I mean, these are young players. So what are they going to do? I mean, even one of their big free agent signings, Randall is a young player. So what is Tibbs going to do? Change his entire philosophy? I'm not saying Jason Kidd would have been that much better, but man, you got to wonder what is going on. I mean, remember years ago when he was on the Bulls, Tibbs was considered one of the best coaches in the NBA. Then he goes to the Timberwolves, and he has trouble dealing with the young players and getting them motivated and focused up there in Minnesota. Then he took the power grab. He took too much power, and it destroyed his reputation. And I didn't know if he was ever going to get a head coaching job again. Not because I don't think he can coach, but because I don't know what team fits what he wants to do. And now you got a young team with Kevin Knox and R.J. Barrett and Ntilikina and Randall and all these guys. And I'm just thinking, how is Tibbs' system, his strategy, his mentality going to get involved with this team? Not that Jason Kidd would have been that much better. I don't really believe that any head coach going to the Knicks is going to make that much of a difference unless they're a special kind of coach. I don't know if Tibbs is that guy. This feels a lot like the Knicks trying to steal the headlines than actually put the best product back on the court. And whenever the NBA returns for the 2020-21 season, whether that's starting in December or January or February, maybe even March, we don't know all the details yet because the NBA is keeping it very, very open-ended. You really have to wonder what the long-term impact is going to be for the Knicks to be bringing in a guy like Tibbs who, as I said, he's not a guy who has a history of working well with young players. It's not that he can't, but the buy-in has been a question at times. And I'm really wondering, Tibbs loves defense. He loves playing guys a lot of minutes. R.J. Barrett, Kevin Knox, Ntilikina, Julius Randle. Are those guys ready for what's coming? I don't know, man. I really don't know. It's going to be an interesting watch, though. I'm very intrigued to observe how this all works out. Text board is open. 609-403-0973. Get on the conversation. By the way, if Jason Kidd was a candidate for that job, but he wasn't a candidate for the Bulls job, maybe it's Jason Kidd's not getting a job in the near future. Because remember, there are a lot of reports out there in the NBA that there won't be as many coaches fired because teams don't want to pay the money in a pandemic with tight finances. They don't want to pay the fired coach and the new coach as well. You know, in an environment where the revenues are all good and everything's on the up and up, you have to wonder, does a team really want to pay one guy and another guy at the same time? I mean, you have teams already like the Bulls and the Cavs and others that are really having to bite the bullet and swallow hard when it comes to the money that they're dished out to guys already. Well, what's going to happen with the rest of the league? I think Jason Kidd may be just out of luck this offseason. He may need to wait a year or two, and that might be best for him. Jason Kidd didn't take the traditional route to becoming a head coach previously. He didn't, pay his dues. He didn't, work in the G League or work as an assistant for getting a head coaching job. Most of the coaches who have been successful in the league have at least had some sort of coaching background. Jason Kidd basically went from being a player to being a coach, like Derek Fisher, and I think that's part of the reason why both of them failed. I think that the best thing to happen for Kidd is to sit there on the Lakers bench and absorb information and absorb things to learn just the tiny micro elements that come with being a coach, because He's next to a guy in Vogel who had to earn his stripes before he became a head coach. And he was successful in one place, not so successful in another. And now he's being successful with the Lakers. You got to wonder if that can rub off on Jason Kidd. But again, the news, according to Adrian Wojnarowski, as well as many others, Ian Begley as well, Tom Thibodeau on his way to becoming the next Knicks head coach. Can't wait to see how that bizarro world is going to work out. Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. 20 minutes from now, I'll give you my UFC picks for tonight. Plus, the text board is open, 609-403-0973. You want to talk Sixers, you want to talk Phillies, you want to talk baseball in general. By the way, I thought the Fox telecast having virtual fans. I don't see virtual fans. I see empty seats. Full of lies these people are. I flipped over here to see virtual fans, and I don't see anything. What did I miss? We got to figure this out. Joshua Hennig here, 97.3 ESPN FM and 97.3 ESPN mobile app, powered by First Bank of Sea Isle City.
This is Sports Bash Saturday with Josh Hennig, live from the Matt Blatt Kia Studios. Here's Josh Hennig.
Josh Hennig back here, live in the Matt Blatt Kia Studios. 97.3 ESPN. Text board is open, 609-403-0973. Again, we'll get to my UFC picks a little bit later this hour. Thanks again to Kevin McCormick for joining us here on the show. Again, Sixers basketball resumes tomorrow night right here on 97.3 ESPN. 609-403-0973. Dan from EHT chimes in, and he gives his prediction about Jason Kidd. He's the Sixers' next head coach will be Jason Kidd. It's interesting you say that because, and follow me down this rabbit hole real quick. So I think that as long as Brett Brown gets the Sixers at least deep in the postseason, he keeps his job. I don't think he's getting fired because I think the Sixers definitely get out of the first round. The only team in the first round matchup-wise that would concern me is maybe the Miami Heat, just because of the Jimmy Butler factor. But otherwise, I think the Sixers get to the second round. And then the second round really depends on, do you run into the Bucks or do you run into somebody else? And what version of the Bucks are you getting? Are you getting the Bucks that don't have Eric Bledsoe back at full capacity, along with Pat Connaughton? Are you getting a fully healthy Bucks team? I'm not sure. When you look at the Raptors do concern me. I think that their team, I think the Raptors might be a dark horse to make the NBA Finals. I think the combination of the backcourt play of Kyle Lowry and Fred VanVleet, along with the rise of Pascal Siakam as a viable, powerhouse all-star player in the Eastern Conference, definitely is a dangerous thing for anybody in the East. I think the Sixers can match up with the Celtics and beat them. So I think as long as Brett, gets to the conference finals, he definitely keeps his job. And part of that again is because I think the Sixers don't want to fire Brett and then have to pay him to go away and hire a new guy. Now, I just said that Jason Kidd might have to wait a year. Well, maybe that's where the benefit is for Kidd with the Sixers, as Dan from EHC is suggesting. Because maybe if the Sixers keep Brett, he comes back next year, they don't make it as far as you want them to. Maybe they underperform in the postseason. Maybe he gets let go, and then there's a situation where Jason Kidd could be the next head coach. But I still don't think even then he becomes head coach, and here's why. I think there's something to be said for the fact that Brett Brown was hired by Sam Hinkie. He was not the chosen candidate of Brian Colangelo or Elton Brand or the majority of the current front office. I think that at some point, no matter how great a coach is, the coach's voice does get a little dry, does get a little stale. Unless you're going to turn over a huge chunk of the roster, sometimes you got to bring in a new guy to get you to the next level if the current coach can't get you there. Now, we don't know what this new version of Ben Simmons and the combination with Shake Milton and the possibility they may move Al Horford in the offseason and all the crazy things that could or couldn't happen, how that all could impact the 76ers' future, and that could impact the head coaching job as well. But the name that I keep coming back to is Sam Cassell, and here's why. Sam Cassell has been an assistant under Doc Rivers for a few years now with the Clippers. He's a guy that it is obvious that he's being groomed to be a head coach in the league. He's a former player who's played on a lot of teams in a lot of different situations. He is a guy who seems to be a coach who can relate to players. And he's a former teammate of Elton Brand. I would not be surprised if that relationship gets involved in all of this. Number one. The number two guy that I think of I think could be a candidate for the Sixers is Tyronn Lue. Tyronn Lue was a guy that got along with LeBron James because LeBron trusted him to criticize him in front of teammates. LeBron didn't trust guys like David Blatt and Mike Brown and some of these other coaches when it came to critiquing him. He didn't trust them. He didn't want to listen to them. LeBron seems to only respect certain kinds of head coaches who have certain styles of coaching and play. He was very tentative to warm up to Eric Spoelstra. Pat Riley sold them on him. LeBron seems to like Frank Vogel because of the style of coaching that he has. Tyronn Lue is a guy, as a former player and a guy that players trust to critique them, could come to the Sixers, and I think that guys like Simmons and Embiid might listen to a little bit more than a Jason Kidd. Jason Kidd is a guy who has a little bit of this is how we did it when I played, so let's try to do it here. I don't know how that will work with the 76ers. The same with Mark Jackson. I think that, how many times have we heard Mark Jackson brought up for the Sixers? There has to be a reason why this guy hasn't been hired by anybody else since being fired by the Warriors. I don't know if he's not a great interviewer. I don't know if teams are just not very interested in his style of coaching or his personality, or if not, I don't know what it is. Maybe he doesn't have a good recommendation. Maybe when teams call Bob Myers about Mark Jackson, he gives them a bad review. I don't know what the details are. There's got to be some reason why this guy hasn't got a coaching job. And don't tell me it's because he's happy being in the booth. Everyone's happy making big money to do a job where half of your job is literally just talking. All right? Listen, one of the reasons why we love talking sports is because, let's be realistic, coaching is hard. All right? You ask anybody who's in the media now who used to be a coach, whether it's a guy like Stan Van Gundy or Mark Jackson or Jeff Van Gundy or any of these guys, they have been known to tell stories, especially Jeff Van Gundy, about the crazy amount of hours they spend studying tape, evaluating the team, dealing with different circumstances off the court, managing the players and their egos and their personal issues, and managing their relationship with the GM and the owner. There's so much that goes into being a head coach that doesn't get talked about because it's not glamorous. And let's be realistic. I think one of the reasons why Brett Brown has kept his job is because he has a good professional relationship with the ownership. Josh Harris, David Blitzer, and the ownership group. I think part of the reason why Brett Brown has his job still is because he has a working relationship with Embiid and Simmons. Remember, it was Brett Brown who was one of the people who was with Joel Embiid, consoling him, talking to him, taking care of him when Embiid's brother died. There's a relationship there. So there has to be a relationship built by these coaches to keep coaching. And if you think about it, that takes work. And maybe for someone like Mark Jackson, maybe he's not a great relationship builder. Maybe a guy like Jason Kidd is not a great relationship builder. Maybe Stan Van Gundy is not the best relationship builder. So maybe some of the guys who are being rumored, part of the reason why they might not get a head coaching job is because maybe they're just not as good at coaches as we thought. Maybe, just maybe, Stan Van Gundy got to an NBA Finals because Dwight Howard was that powerful and Hedo Turkoglu was that impactful that season. Maybe the success, however marginal it was, that a coach like Mark Jackson had was more of a byproduct of Steph Curry than it was Mark Jackson's coaching. At some point, we got to realize that coaches in the NBA don't have the impact on their players as much as other sports. In the NFL and the NHL, sometimes a coach, if they hit or miss on a certain aspect of their coaching, they can totally bomb or send a team into a spiral. Whereas in the NBA, I think players can overcome average coaching. There's only a handful of coaches that can genuinely elevate a team. And I don't think that at the end of the day, if you don't have the players, I don't know how much a coach really matters or doesn't matter. You know, Doc Rivers, it wasn't that he was a bad coach in Orlando, but he was expecting to have Tracy McGrady and Grant Hill. Well, guess what? Grant Hill couldn't stay healthy, and boom, there goes that whole situation. So it wasn't that Doc Rivers was a failure as a coach in Orlando. It's that he didn't have the players. Look at a guy like Jeff Van Gundy down in Houston. You know, Jeff Van Gundy made the NBA Finals in the lockout shortened season with the Knicks. But as soon as Patrick Ewing got too old to really have an impact as a player anymore, and as soon as Allen Houston signed that big contract, started regressing because of injuries, and as soon as all these other things happened in New York, team wasn't as good. He goes to Houston. When Yao Ming was healthy, the Rockets looked like a championship contender. When Yao Ming wasn't healthy, and it was Chuck Hayes playing center, and Tracy McGrady trying to do everything he can to carry that basketball team, they weren't so good. So at some point, can we just admit that it doesn't matter if Brett Brown is here or not? That at the end of the day, if Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons don't do their job, that the success and failure of this basketball team falls on them? Just saying.